And we're on. Hey, Esther.
Hi, Florian.
Already episode 3 of Slator Pod. What have you been up to? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Obviously, we had a bit of a break, 2 or 3 weeks, I think. It flies quickly when you're off for the holidays. But back in the swing of things now. This week, actually, I went to a localization meetup in London. So that was pretty good. So we have a group on LinkedIn for London localization professionals.
Okay.
We tend to meet up. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We tend to meet up once a month. It's been going for about 18 months or so now. Meet up once a month on a Wednesday. Sometimes, most of the times, it's sort of meeting up to have networking drinks. There's a core group of about 20 or so people who come along. Although the wider group, I think, is about 350 people or so on LinkedIn.
We
get about a lot of people. We get sort of 20 regulars.
Is that through the Meetup app, or is it only LinkedIn?
It's pretty much, I think, only LinkedIn at this stage. Yeah, we were exploring sort of different mediums for, arranging meetups. People have different preferences, but I think for the moment, it's pretty much on LinkedIn. But this time, actually was more of a, I guess, industry focus. So we started also doing these presentations. So members of the group will volunteer to do presentations and also host one of the meetups. So we're calling that kind of edition of it localization surgery. So this time, actually, we held it really close by to where I'm based in London, in Old Street, at Farfetch offices.
Okay.
So Farfetch, have you heard of them?
No.
So it's kind of an online luxury fashion brand retailer or platform.
Sounds good to me.
They help clients who are within the luxury fashion industry sort of sell around the world. So sort of brand representation and what have you. And they actually have their own internal language service unit. So there was a guy from Farfetch who was doing a presentation, really good. He's a senior content manager called Alex Katsambas, who was talking a lot about their process for transcreation and also cultural consulting, he called it. So he was explaining sort of the process of cultural consulting around the world for brands looking to enter new markets and launch advertising campaigns. And he shared some quite interesting stories about brands who've kind of had epic fails when it comes to understanding local conventions or what have you. So interesting presentation. And then, we went down to the bar for a drink afterwards. So
interesting. So how does this compare to Lock Lunch, the other LinkedIn phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, you sort of see some of the same people. So some of the people that I'd met at a previous Lock Lunch were also at the localization professionals.
Yeah.
I mean, our group is just a London group, and it is quite homegrown. So it was started by somebody, someone on the buy side who actually moved to London about 18 months ago and was just looking to connect with other people in the industry. It's quite sort of developed a bit organically like that, but only limited to London at the moment.
It's an interesting industry. Somebody once told me that he's never seen that amount of need to connect with industry peers. Probably there's a few other industries, but in this industry there's a very strong need to connect and to have these types of regular meetups outside of bigger conferences. It's very interesting.
I mean, I definitely get it. I mean, I think certainly within the London Localization Professionals Group, we've got a good mix of translators, of buyers, and then of technology and language service professionals as well. I mean, obviously for translators, it makes sense. You're potentially working on your own for most of the day. But then I think even within buyer organizations, I mean, sometimes people are working in very small teams. So it makes sense to connect with people who have similar experiences, whether that's, on the sort of supplier side or within a buyer organization. So I think it works quite well. And it's quite a relaxed atmosphere as well, certainly within our group.
Cool. Well, I mean, in your part of the world, it's a little easier. I mean, London's gigantic, so there's something going on. It's probably there's more activity. I mean, here in Zurich, there's a lock lunch now, and there's some of the MT meetups. But yeah. Anyway, let's move on to our first topic of the day. I think the European Union is showering a few $1 million on the European LSP landscape. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a good start to the year, I suppose, for quite a few LSPs. And actually this week, I think we had quite a few stories coming from the EU, but this one was a contract award that came out of the European Parliament's DGT service. So this was an award that was originally supposed to be for a contract into 19 target languages, but ended up being awarded into 18 languages. And it was for a total of 63 million euros, or around $70 million over a 2-year period.
Can we just clarify, sorry to interrupt there, can we just clarify a couple of things? So there's 2 DGTs, right? One for the Parliament and one for the Commission. So this one was for
Parliament.
The Parliament, right?
There's at least two. Because I think there might also be other DGTs in other areas.
All right. Those are the 2 big ones, though, right? The Commission and the Parliament. Because when I was doing the image selection, I almost missed that. And put the wrong individual on the cover of the article. And then why is it 18 instead of 19?
Yeah, so Irish actually, into Irish, was not awarded. They didn't really give any explanation, I don't think, as to why that was. But I mean, I think speculating a little bit, it might be because there was a lack of suitable linguists, or I think typically they have maybe struggled to find suppliers for into Irish work.
We covered this a year ago, or even before. I think they're struggling to get those translators for that language, right? So that's probably the reason behind it.
I think so. But I mean, overall, this was a massive contract, not the biggest probably, but certainly sort of up there in terms of spending allocation. You had over 50 suppliers named on the contract award. And interestingly, I mean, they had the suppliers split out into main suppliers per target language, with then somewhere between 1 to 3, I'm trying to get the wording right, alternative, or I think additional suppliers. So obviously volumes and budget is not necessarily guaranteed to any one person or any one provider on that contract. But some people, won across different contracts. So you had, I think, Amplex or Lingsoft and a number of others named at least twice on different language combinations.
I think Lionbridge also picked up a couple of.
Lionbridge picked up the biggest, which was Danish, which is worth, I think, about 7 million euros over 2 years, and that had 3 or 4. That had 3 or 4 additional suppliers named as well. So that was the biggest lot, Danish. But all of the languages were worth over 1 million euros over 2 years.
And then, unrelated to that, I think they also announced another the renewal of the SDL contract, right, for the TMS.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it technically counts as a renewal because in their kind of specific terminology, but it's a repeat contract. So you have, I don't know how you pronounce it, but CATE 2020. So this was the technology award for translation productivity. So the DGT and across a number of different EU departments have been using SDL Trados for a number of years, and this contract was up again, a repeat contract, and it was worth 10 million euros, just over 10 million euros, I think. So initially it's for a time period of 2 years, but then they have the option to renew or extend the contract for a further 6 years, and that is decided every 2 years. So maximum duration, 8 years for SDL. So definitely a big win over 2 years, but potentially also, guaranteed revenues over 8 years or so.
Yeah, probably would be a nightmare to change the CAT tool across all of those.
Yeah, I mean,
there's probably a few thousand licenses out there, right?
There are. I think they did specify the number of licenses or the number of people that were actually translators that were actually working within the services. But I think interestingly as well, SDL actually beat, I think it was 4 other tenderers. So they did have some competition on this contract. But obviously they came out on top again as the incumbent.
Yeah. As the incumbent, indeed. Yeah, and we also published a couple of pro articles this week for Slator Pro subscribers. Let me just kind of give a little bit of information about that. I mean, first we published I think by now is the 4th edition of our buyer tracker. So what we do there is we look where some of the major buyers are moving to, or vendors that are moving to the buy side. So we track them and we put them in an article that's behind our paywall. So one thing that we noticed this time around, we had a number of positions being filled by Amazon. I think that we had about 4 new localization positions on the media side, the studio side, or Prime Video.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty interesting. I think it was kind of 1/3 of the people we covered were from Amazon. I mean, there's a couple other people from Amazon's, not the media side, but there are other localization operations. But there was quite a big move into their video or OTT, right? Streaming services side. So that's interesting, and some of them came from the vendor side. So it looks like Amazon is continuing to ramp up on OTT. And obviously, this is something we're going to cover at the London conference, where we have 1 day of video of streaming and gaming and media and gaming. So there's a lot of activity in that space. Then we also did the annual scorecard for the publicly listed LSPs. I mean, you dug into this, right?
Yes.
So we did a half-year article back in probably, what was that, July? And now we were able to look at the full year. There's a handful, probably, what is it, 9 or 10 public?
Yeah, 9.
Yeah, 9 publicly listed LSPs, and you can look at their share price and how it performs. So I think the long and the short of it, it was pretty much in line with the kind of the broader markets, right? I mean, the S&P 500 over the year was up super strong, 30%. I checked another global benchmark, the MSCI, the global benchmark was up a little less, maybe like 23%, because I think the US outperformed the rest of the world. But still, I think some of basically the LSPs were in line. I think last year in 2018, they outperformed quite substantially, because I think RWS was up very strongly in 2018. And some of the other plays like Appen were just through the roof. But this year, it was kind of more in line. Obviously subscribers can go into the details there, but at the top we had the Japanese company Rosetta. Quite a small stock, so it's always a question how liquid this particular stock in that company is. So the share price tends to jump around and be quite volatile. I think number 2 was Appen again. So Appen continued to rise up. But that said, though, Appen's been quite flat, if not even down a little bit over the past 6 months. So they had a super high run up in 2017, 18 and into 2019, but then kind of slowed down a little bit. And then you had, RWS, SDL, Straker, Flitto, and then Honyaku Center and Zoo Digital. Basically, that would be the ranking. So we also have a great chart, that bubble chart, right? Where we look at the size of the company. Cap. Yeah, in terms of the market cap. I think it's a great way to look at this. You see kind of how much what's the value of these companies in the market.
Yeah, I suppose it's putting it into perspective a little bit rather than looking at just the performance.
Just the performance, where these people are, right? If you're Appen, you're at the $2.5 billion market cap, or RWS at a $2.5 billion market cap. If you add 50% to that, obviously, you're going up by $1 billion rather than just by a couple of million. So anyway, interesting article for the subscribers, and a lot of analysis around it. So that was interesting. We also published the jobs index for January. Can you just walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I know you mentioned the buyer tracker slightly earlier, but so the job index is something a little bit different. So it's something that we're publishing and tracking every month, and we have been doing so now for I think 18 months or so. The job index really is designed for to be able to look at how the job market within the language industry is performing, whether it's expanding or contracting over time. So we started in July 2018, and that is the baseline of 100. So since then, I mean, we've been tracking the job index based on a number of different metrics. So, for example, we've been looking at the number of profiles on LinkedIn using either keyword searches or different categories of profiles as well. And then we also aggregate different data points from a number of different sources across, for example, some of the top job boards like Indeed, I think Monster, and a number of others as well. And we source information on job openings across LSPs and technology companies, specifically those that are within the LSPI, so top LSPs, how many jobs have they got open, things like that.
So what happened in January?
Yeah, so I mean, it's dipped a bit in January 2020, but that's not sort of unexpected. We saw the same trend in January 2019 as well. There was a slight dip last year in January and February, and it then recovered throughout the year. So, I mean, overall, over the 18 months that we've been tracking, it's up around 8%. So 18 months, 8%. And versus January 2019, it's up about 6.4%.
That's what I like that we. Yeah. So I like that we can now go back and track. I remember when we published it initially in the first couple of months, it's like you had like 1 or 2 data points. It was a little ridiculous. It's like, well, okay, but now after 18 months, it actually becomes much more meaningful, and you start to see seasonal trends. So I'm really looking forward to how this is going to develop this year, and whether we're going to have a certain seasonality also compared to last year.
Exactly. Yeah. I would expect so. I mean, there definitely are sort of, seasonal trends that you would expect in the industry with, I don't know, people emerging from studies, or definitely people not really looking for jobs, I suppose, or not advertising jobs in January particularly.
Okay. And we also, in this podcast, we can also highlight a couple of stories from our service called Slator Sweep, where we basically aggregate all of the things that land in our giant story funnel, but don't make it to a story on the Slator.com website. So, you can subscribe to that service, and then we send you an email every day. Just to add to your general email load, but it's actually very interesting. Typically, we have about 5 to 10 to 15 additional links to other stories that are out there. So this week we had picked up on a couple of stories. We decided to not go for editorially, but that are still interesting. So Amazon Translate continues to really build out their machine translation offering. I think that they offer something what they call batch translation, which you can upload a bunch of files and run it through. So kind of instead of, it's a little technical. I haven't read it in great detail, but basically, long story short, they're really expanding their MT offering, and posting about it on their blog. So that's interesting. And then staying with MT, or basically, NLP, natural language processing, we also picked up on Google open sourcing something called Albert. This is what they call a light BERT. And if you want to know more about BERT, this is an open source natural language model, which we covered in detail a couple of months ago. It's quite technical. So we were looking at it, how BERT matters for machine translation, and there are some implications for this model. It's very technical, but I think these types of developments, we need to be aware of them and make sure that we understand what the big tech guys are doing.
It's wide. It's sort of relevant for the wider context, I suppose, of what's happening within neural technologies.
Yeah, exactly.
And models.
And models, right? So I want to be on top of that. And another story we picked up on was in Australia. We did cover this maybe like half a year ago to a year ago. They're launching a new accreditation system for translator. They have launched it, I think, at the turn of the year. And now there was a piece in an Australian newspaper about how some veteran translators and interpreters have chosen not to take the accreditation and are now experiencing a fair amount of loss of business, right? So they're getting less business. So an interesting story. We may be able to cover it going forward, but so those are the types of stories that we stick into Slator Sweep and send out on a daily basis. So, well, with the 2020 now starting, I think it's time for a bit of an outlook as well.
Okay.
Crystal ball gazing. So let's start with M&A. Why M&A? Because you've been very busy doing the M&A report, which we're going to be publishing soon.
Soon.
What's the timeline on that?
Soon is the date. 2 to 3 weeks.
2-3 weeks? Ah, there you are, managing expectations.
Yeah. I don't know if I've overcommitted there, but yeah, let's see. And actually, it's not just the M&A report, but it's an M&A and funding report. So we've been looking back at not only the M&A, so merger and acquisitions that Slator covered in 2019, but also analysing some of the funding stories that we covered in 2019 as well.
Yeah. So that's going to come out in 2 to 3 weeks. We might make it a little earlier even. But generally, in terms of language industry M&A, it's been a pretty active year, 2019, and you can read all about it in the report. But for 2020, what are your thoughts on how it's going to play out in the first half of the year, second half of the year? Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I'd sort of make predictions for the first half versus second half, but I think overall, I mean, one of our main predictions, or one things to watch, I suppose, is the private equity-backed LSPs for a number of reasons. I mean, there are obviously private equity-backed LSPs who potentially are still going to do acquisitions coming up, and we did see that in 2019, private equity-backed LSPs doing a number of acquisitions, but I think proportionally less private equity-backed LSPs were doing acquisitions in 2019 versus 2018. So I think that will continue to a certain extent, but also the thing to watch is potentially a private equity exit from an LSP, because as we've already kind of commented, a lot of the private equity investments in LSPs are reaching some kind of investment maturity, with some already potentially looking for to sell those LSPs on.
I'm sure a lot of them. Yes, sorry to jump in here. I think a lot of them are looking to exit, right? I mean, some of these investments have been there for 4 or 5 years, and that's probably one of the main drivers in 2020. If these funds are able to offload some of those LSPs, and I mean, my personal take is that what we lacked in 2019 was like a major transformative deal. And frankly, I don't see it even happening in 2020 either. I mean, obviously, there's always room for a surprise, but like one of the 5 super agencies that we one of those 5 agencies that we called super agencies in our report buying another one, right? I think it's unlikely we're going to see that. But yeah, as you say, private equity continues to play a role, and the vendor landscape continues to be fairly fragmented, although somewhat less so than it used to be. So if you are pursuing a so-called buy and build strategy, it's probably tougher to find suitable targets. But I think probably the pace I would predict, if I could make any prediction, is it's going to be similar to 2020, if obviously the kind of the macroeconomic environment holds up, right? I mean, record low interest rates, pretty solid economic growth. No major outside shock, then I think things will kind of plow on. What's your take on the funding side? I mean, in 2019 we had Unbobble, which is definitely the major standout. Everything else paled in comparison to their 60 million round. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing about the M&A actually, which is, I think it's good to watch the vertical mix. So which verticals are being acquired. And in 2019, we saw a definite shift or interest in media, with the likes of TransPerfect and Straker and Keywords, to mention a few, acquiring in that industry or that vertical. So definitely, I mean, obviously the mix was then fairly balanced, I suppose, with multi-vertical LSPs obviously continuing to be attractive. But I mean, I think media and gaming will still continue to be attractive, along with multi-vertical LSPs, and then some specialized areas, potentially like life sciences, finance, those kind of heavily regulated. But coming back to the funding, definitely Unbabble was the most heavily funded in 2019. I know they got the Series C of 60 million, and they're funded to how much now? That was their Series C, so in total they've got about 90.
100 million, 90 or 100 million, yeah, roughly that. So 2020, are we going to see something? Are we going to see something similar?
I wouldn't be surprised either way. I mean, I'm kind of hedging my bets there, I suppose.
No, that's fine.
It is remarkable. 60 million is a lot of money, and it's not something we've seen really within the core language space before. I mean, obviously we also cover sort of slightly adjacent services like language data and NLP, and I think in those spaces you are seeing sort of 100 million plus funding investments, not so much within the core language services or language technology space. I think maybe some of the platforms might continue to be funded. If you look at some of the interpreting platforms, for example, some of them have already done Series A, Series B, might be looking for some kind of follow-on funding. And I think it would be difficult to sort of predict, but I think I would be surprised, maybe pleasantly surprised, if there was anything bigger than a 60 million funding investment in 2020.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're gonna get back to this in 2021.
Cautiously saying no. Yeah, exactly. We'll look at how that plays out anyway.
That's right. No, I think I'd agree. But then I was pretty surprised by the unbubble round. So who knows what's going to happen in 2020.
I do think funding will continue. I think the language industry will continue to be attractive for some of these venture capital firms in particular, and especially as LSPs and technology providers continue to emphasize the AI element. So obviously a lot of AI. It's all about AI, as we know. A lot of the companies that received startup funding in 2019, most of them had some kind of element of AI-enabled or AI-powered software and platforms. And with this kind of human-in-the-loop model, I think is particularly attractive for investors at the moment. So I think you will see that continue, but probably more funding, but in smaller amounts would be my tentative prediction overall.
Yeah, I think you need to have that machine learning AI, whatever you call it, labeled to it. Otherwise, you're unlikely to get funding. I mean, I said that at the past 2 Slator cons that we're really moved from this disintermediation play in kind of the early teens, mid-teens to now. 2010 to like 2015 to now, really everything's about AI. If you don't have that particular technology angle, it's unlikely you're going to get a substantial amount of funding. So on the machine translation side, it's interesting that we discussed the Content MT sale in our last episode. So for MT as well. Progress has been somewhat, I guess, incremental in 2019, and I would expect this to continue. Bar any major technology breakthrough, I think they're just continue to really tailor, tweak, improve all those language models. You do see, that's super anecdotal, just from me kind of checking those publicly available NMT, whatever you call it, portals, engines. I think the quality is continuing to go up somewhat. Yeah. But I think we haven't seen any major breakthroughs in 2019 in terms of exceptional additional fluency or certain errors that we're no longer seeing that we didn't see that we did see in 2018. So I think that's going to be somewhat incremental, and obviously everybody needs to include these types of technologies now in their workflow. So that's one of the predictions.
I would agree with that, and also sort of say that I think what's happening now, certainly within some of the providers and sellers of machine translation, when it's coupled with services anyway, I think everybody across the board is really just looking at hammering sales. I think and one of the listed providers, I can't remember who it was one of the Japanese ones, said that they had increased machine translation sales threefold over a quarter versus the previous year. So I think everybody's really just kind of hammering home that message and going out to clients with their offerings. It's not so much it is also about the technology development, but I think a lot of it is also communicating to buyers different offerings. And obviously emphasizing also the business to business element. I mean, I know we kind of touched on the difference between the the B2C models and the B2B setup as well, with really a lot of the machine translation providers trying to now focus on taking their solutions to the large enterprises.
Yeah, it's a hard sale. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a machine translation salesperson, frankly. I think it's a pretty hard sale unless you go into a fully managed solution. But if you're just kind of hawking an API to some model, I mean that's very tough to sell. And there's obviously ginormous competition. Actually, the Swiss government recently bought 2,000 DeepL licenses. It's a story I'm probably going to run next week or even the week after. So you're even competing with companies that provide very little customer support. So it's probably a pretty tough market for them. But obviously volumes are growing or continue to grow. So it's one of the predictions is that these companies are likely going to do somewhat well in 2020. So what's going on in the first quarter with events? I mean, we don't have any SlatorCon scheduled for the first quarter. We're obviously going to have London in May, but you're going to be speaking in Canada, right?
That's right. Yep. So at ALIA in Canada, in Ottawa, end of February, 28th of February. So I'll be one of the keynote speakers there.
Great.
And you're traveling as well?
Yeah, I'm going to, near San Francisco, near San Mateo. I'm going to be speaking at XTM Live, XTM, the TMS provider. So I'm going to be speaking at their I think they have 3 these conferences a year. So this is the US conference that's on March 19 and 20th. I think my presentation is going to be on the 19th, so I get to go over to California again. Really looking forward to that.
Very good.
Great. All right. Well, that was it for episode 3. Thanks so much, Esther.
Thanks a lot, Florian. See you.